Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be doing an exercise that is going to strengthen your understanding of React components. First, we'll create our application without using React components. Then we're going to refactor our application to use components, which is going to make our code more scalable and more readable. So this is how our exercise is going to look once we are done. It's going to have a course title. Then it's going to have different parts. So the first part is going to be fundamentals of React, and it's going to have the number of exercises associated. So in this case, it's going to have 10. And it's going to have a second part, which is using props. And it's going to have 13 exercises. And it's going to have a third part, which is using states. And it's going to have 9 exercises. And finally, we're going to have the total exercises, which is calculated by adding the individual exercises, which in this case is going to be 32. So let's create a new folder, and we're going to call it course info exercise. And we're going to open our terminal, and we're going to navigate to this folder. And once we are here, we're going to run our commands. If you don't understand what these commands are, you can watch the previous video in which I explain each command and break it down. So our application is going to be called course info. And we're going to use the React template. Then we're going to change our directory to our project, which is course info. And in here, we're going to run npm install, which is going to install our dependencies. And once that's finished, we're going to head over to our application and to the source folder. And again, we're going to delete the unnecessary files. In our app file, we're going to create our component. It's going to take no input. And in here, we're going to define different courses. So we're going to have a variable called course, and it's going to hold the value full stack web development. And we're going to have a variable called part 1, which is going to be fundamentals of React. And we're going to have an exercise associated with it. So how many exercises this part has. In this case, we're going to give it 10. And again, we're going to have another part. We're going to call it using props. And it's also going to have an exercise. And we're going to set it equal to 13. And we're going to have our final part, which is part 3. And we're going to set it equal to using states. And it's also going to have an exercise, and we're going to give it a value of 9. Now we have our variables ready, so we're going to return our block of code. So again, since we're going to be returning multiple components, we're going to have a container. And in our container, first, we're going to have an h1 tag that is going to display the course. We're going to be using curly braces if we want to substitute the variable course in our return statement. So we're going to have curly braces, and inside the curly braces, we're going to have course. Then we're going to have a paragraph tag that's going to consist of the name of the first part and its number of exercises. So we're going to have this 3 times. So we're going to copy this and paste it. And we're going to have part 2 and part 3, exercise 2 and exercise 3. And finally, we're going to have a tag that's going to calculate the total number of exercises. So we're going to have a p tag, and we're going to have total exercises, and we're going to substitute the sum. So inside the curly braces, you can do calculations. So we're going to calculate the sum of the exercises. So exercise 1 plus exercise 2 plus exercise 3. And now we can save our app file, but we also need to export this component. So we're going to have export default app. Now we can save our file and go to the main file. In here, we're going to import our app component. We're also going to import React DOM. And in here, we're going to render our components. So we're going to have create root, and we're going to pass in document.get element by ID, and we're going to pass in root, and we're going to render our component. Now, if you don't understand this line, you can go to the previous video where I explain each part. Now we can save our file and open our terminal. And we're going to navigate to our project, which is in the course info exercise folder and inside course info. In here, we're going to run the npm run dev command so we can start our application. As you can see, the port number is no longer 5173. That is because our previous application is still running. So I'm going to close that application and I'm going to run npm run dev again. So now I've closed the previous application, and if I run npm run dev, I get the default port number, which is 5173. So now if we go to our browser, we get the following result, which is what we wanted. Now we need to think about our application's scalability. So let's say we had multiple courses. In that case, our code would be very repetitive and prone to errors. So to fix these issues we might face, we should refactor our code to use multiple React components. So in the return statement, we're going to remove our previous code and we're going to write our components. So the first component we're going to have is the header component, which is going to take input, and it's simply going to return an h1 tag with the actual header. So we're going to have props dot, in curly braces, we're going to have props dot course. So we're going to pass in this course when we actually call the header component. Now the next component we have is going to be the content component, which is going to be the name of each part and the exercise it contains. So we're going to create a component called content, and it is going to take input. So we're going to have props, and in here we can actually nest in another component. So we do that by returning. So we're going to return, and in here we're going to have a container which holds another component which we're going to create, which is going to be a component called part. So what part is going to do is it's going to take the name of a part and the number of exercises, and it's going to display it. So we actually haven't created the part component, so we're going to create it now. So we're going to have const part. It is going to take input, and it's going to return a p tag with props.part. So we're going to pass in the part name, and we're going to have a space, and we're going to pass in the number of exercises. So this is going to be our part component. So now we can fill it in. So we're going to have part, and we're going to set it equal to whatever props.p1 is. So now when we use the content component, we're going to pass in p1, and we're also going to pass in the number of exercises. So we're going to have exercises, and in here we're going to pass in props.e1. Now since we have 3 parts, we're simply going to copy and paste this 3 times. And we're going to change P1 to P2, E1 to E2. And finally, we're going to have P3 and E3. Now the content and the parse component should be working, and we're going to have a final component that's going to calculate the total amount of exercises. So we're going to call it total. It's going to take an input, and it's going to return a p tag, which is going to be props.e1 plus props.e2 plus props.e3. So now we're going to provide these informations in our root component, which is the app component. So back here, first we're going to put in our header component, which takes a course input. So we're going to pass in our course variable. Then we're going to have a content component, which takes 3 parts. So we're going to have P1, and we're going to set it to part 1. We're going to have P2, and we're going to set it to part 2. We're going to have P3, we're going to set it to part 3. And it's also going to take the number of exercises. So we're going to have E1, and we're going to set it to exercises 1. We're going to have E2, and we're going to set it to exercises 2. And finally, we're going to have E3, and we're going to set it to exercises 3. And we're going to close our component. And finally, we're going to have the total component, which is going to take, again, the number of exercises. So we're going to have E1, and we're going to set it to exercises 1. We're going to have E2, and we're going to set it to exercises 2. And finally, we're going to have E3, and we're going to set it to exercises 3. And we're going to close our component. Now we can save our file and go to the browser. As you can see, we get the same output, but here we forgot to add the text total exercises. When we calculate the total number of exercises, we can simply fix that by going back to our component. And in the total component, we're going to add the text total exercises. And now if we save our file and go back to the browser, we get our desired output. So this has been an exercise on React components. Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel to show your support.